President Trump, like many before him, has once again shown little concern for African nations. But can we really be surprised? His administration recently released the 2025 list of countries eligible for the U.S. visa-free program, and when Africans took a closer look, they made a startling discovery: all 54 African nations were excluded. This isn't exactly new, but it reinforces how Western nations, particularly the U.S., continue to view Africa. And it doesn't stop there. Trump is also pushing for a total travel ban on 41 countries, including several from Africa. But what does this mean, and why has Africa been left out? Let's take a deeper look. The U.S. visa-free program, officially called the Visa Waiver Program, allows citizens of selected countries to travel to the United States for business or tourism without needing a visa. Simply put, if a person qualifies, they can enter the U.S. without going through the usual visa application process. Under the Trump administration, the list of eligible countries was updated this year. For those included, this means they can visit the U.S. for up to 90 days without the hassle of applying for a visa, making travel much more convenient. However, while some countries remained on the list, others were either added or removed, sparking discussions about the latest changes. The 2025 list includes 40 countries from Europe, Asia, and parts of the Middle East. One of the most surprising changes is the removal of the United Kingdom. Despite this, UK travelers can still qualify under certain conditions, meaning they still have some level of access. Another major update is the inclusion of Romania. This means Romanian citizens can now visit the U.S. visa-free for up to 90 days, whether for business or tourism. Romania's addition highlights the country's strengthening diplomatic ties with the U.S. and its improvements in meeting the visa waiver program's strict security standards. By allowing Romania into the program, the U.S. is signaling confidence in the country's border security and cooperation. But the biggest concern here is that not a single African country made the list. In fact, since the program began, no African nation has ever been included. This continued exclusion of all 54 African countries only highlights the ongoing struggles they face in gaining easier access to the United States. For years, African applicants have faced high visa rejection rates, with U.S. officials justifying the denials by citing concerns about fraud, immigration violations, and security risks. Reports indicate that in 2023 alone, nearly 60% of African students applying for the necessary F1 visa to study in the United States were turned away. Since returning to office, Trump's administration has intensified efforts to enforce strict border controls and implement large-scale deportations, disproportionately affecting immigrants from Africa and Latin America. These new measures could result in thousands of undocumented African immigrants being expelled from the country. Officials argue that when there are high numbers of visa overstays, the criteria for entry become even stricter, particularly for those seeking asylum or experiencing economic hardship. Security concerns and strained diplomatic relations between the U.S. and certain African nations have also played a role in increased visa rejection rates. While the U.S. visa-free program was initially created to encourage travel and business, the continuous exclusion of African nations raises serious questions about the fairness of American immigration policies and the country's relationship with the continent. However, the Trump administration is not stopping there. Reports suggest that plans are underway for a sweeping new travel ban, potentially affecting up to 43 countries. According to a leaked draft published by the New York Times on March 14, 2025, the proposed restrictions go beyond the travel bans implemented during Trump's first term. The draft, which was reportedly developed by diplomatic and security officials, categorizes countries into three Tier Red, nationals from 11 countries would be completely barred from entering the United States. Among them are 3 African nations: Sudan, Somalia, and Libya. The next level, Tier Orange, would impose heavy visa restrictions, only allowing wealthy business travelers to enter. This category includes 10 countries, with African nations such as South Sudan, Sierra Leone, and that would be given 60 days to improve their security screening measures or risk moving to a higher level of restriction. Several African countries, including Angola, Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Cape Verde, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Gambia, Liberia, Mali, Mauritania, Saint Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, São Tomé and Príncipe, Vanuatu, and Zimbabwe are included in this category. Once the information spread across social media, it sparked heated debates, with many Africans calling on their governments to prioritize national development rather than seek approval from Western nations. One social media user commented that the ban was unnecessary, stating, "Honestly, most people from these countries get denied visas most of the time anyway. This ban is just a way of saying, don't even bother applying." Another person argued that the policy was discriminatory rather than security-based, writing, "Banning nearly half of Africa isn't about safety, it's about discrimination. Africa plays a crucial role in the global community, and policies like this only widen the divide instead of fostering cooperation." As of now, the list has not been officially approved by the U.S. government, but the proposal is consistent with a Trump executive order already in place. This order requires stricter security checks on all foreign travelers seeking entry into the U.S. and directs government agencies to assess which nations have inadequate screening processes, recommending partial or full travel bans for those failing to meet U.S. standards. Trump's stance on Africa has been clear through his immigration policies, which seem to disproportionately target the continent. Unlike previous American presidents who worked to strengthen diplomatic and economic ties with African nations, Trump has largely ignored the region since returning to office. While he has not explicitly stated an anti-African agenda, his actions suggest otherwise, as many of his policies continue to work against African nations rather than fostering cooperation or mutual growth. On his first day in office, Trump signed more than 200 executive orders covering various areas, including trade, energy, immigration, and climate change. Some of these policies have had an impact on African nations. One of his first actions was to put a temporary stop to international aid. Under his executive order, all U.S. foreign development assistance was suspended for 90 days, while officials reviewed the efficiency of these programs and ensured that funding aligned with his foreign policy goals. Trump argued that government bureaucracy and the foreign aid sector often work against American interests. His directive required agency heads overseeing U.S. foreign development programs to halt new funding commitments to foreign nations, international organizations, and NGOs until the review was complete. The Office of Management and Budget, OMB, was tasked with enforcing this freeze. As many know, the U.S. has been a significant source of aid for several African nations, and this suspension directly affected them. Another area that could be affected is the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which allows African countries duty-free access to the U.S. market. Trump's plans to establish an external revenue service could potentially change or limit the benefits African nations receive from this program. In addition to these measures, Trump also withdrew the U.S. from the World Health Organization, WHO. The U.S. had been the WHO's largest donor, contributing $1.284 billion during the 2022 to 2023 period. Cutting off this funding weakened the organization's ability to respond to global health emergencies and carry out other essential health initiatives. Experts warned that Africa would face greater health risks due to the U.S. withdrawal, as the WHO has played a major role in tackling diseases like HIV and malaria across the continent. Throughout both his first and current terms, Trump has shown little interest in building diplomatic relationships with African nations. In fact, the only African country he has ever acknowledged in any significant way is South Africa, and even that engagement was marked by controversy. Early in his presidency, Trump falsely accused the South African government of seizing land from the white minority population. Despite these claims being debunked, he never retracted his statement or issued an apology. Instead, he went on to cut aid to South Africa, including funding that supported HIV/AIDS treatment programs. Another indication of Trump's lack of engagement with Africa is his consideration of reducing the U.S. Africa Command Africom, a military structure directly linked to the U.S. government. AFRICOM was established in 2007 under President George W. Bush to strengthen U.S. military influence on the continent and advance American interests. Over the years, every administration expanded its role, but Trump's government is now considering scaling it back. According to CNBC, there are discussions about shifting Africom under European command, effectively reducing its significance and presence in Africa. Based on sources familiar with the discussions, the U.S. is currently considering a plan that has already gained support from some defense officials. However, critics argue that such a move would weaken America's military influence in Africa, creating an opportunity for China and Russia to expand their presence. Whether or not this plan will be fully implemented remains uncertain, but the fact that President Trump is even entertaining the idea speaks volumes. It suggests that his administration has little interest in maintaining strong ties with Africa. This stance isn't new for Trump. Since his first term, he has shown little engagement with the continent, making offensive remarks about African nations in 2018 and failing to build meaningful relationships with African leaders. But why is Trump so indifferent toward Africa? The answer can be found in his decision not to invite any African nations to his 2025 inauguration. As the inauguration approached, leaders from countries like Nigeria and Mozambique expressed interest in attending. A report published by the New York Post on January 11, 2025, highlighted how several foreign leaders, including those from Peru and Chile, were eager to secure an invitation. However, none of them were included on the guest list. During his inauguration speech, Trump made a statement that reflected his perspective on Africa. He questioned how, after decades of independence, some nations still struggle with basic infrastructure despite having abundant natural resources like gold, diamonds, oil, and uranium. He criticized leaders who fail to provide health care, food, and education for their people while spending money on weapons to oppress their own citizens. His words, though controversial, touch on a harsh reality many African leaders have failed their own people. While Western interference has undoubtedly played a role in Africa's struggles, corruption among African politicians has only made matters worse. Instead of investing in development, many leaders siphon national wealth into personal offshore accounts, some of which have even been frozen by foreign governments. As a result, patriotism has eroded, with many young Africans desperate to leave their countries, sometimes risking their lives in dangerous migration attempts to the West. It's undeniable that Africa has been exploited by external forces, both historically and in the present day. However, blaming outside influences alone ignores the responsibility of weak and self-serving African leaders who contribute to the continent's struggles. The reality is, unless African leaders step up and make real changes, nothing will improve. If they don't take charge of their own destiny, the reality is, Unless African leaders step up and make real changes, nothing will improve. If they don't take charge of their own destiny, the West will continue to dismiss and disregard Africa. Take Trump, for example. Whether people like him or not, he is undeniably a strong leader. Trump has been implementing clear policies under his America First agenda. His focus is on his own country, and while some of his decisions may affect other nations, his priority is always the United States. He does what he believes is best for his people without concern for how it impacts others. So why can't African leaders do the same? Imagine if African nations were as developed and self-sufficient as Western countries. They would have a real voice in global affairs. They wouldn't be treated as an afterthought, and young Africans wouldn't feel the need to risk their lives migrating illegally in search of better opportunities. If Africa had strong economies and well-functioning systems, perhaps some of its countries would even be included in the U.S. visa-free program. At this point, President Trump's actions should serve as a wake-up call for African leaders. The current situation is disappointing, and the continent urgently needs bold, decisive leadership. Fortunately, there are a few promising leaders who have given people hope, figures like General Chiani of Niger, President Traore of Burkina Faso, and Assimi Goïta of Mali. They have shown that Africa is not powerless and that change is possible. It's no surprise that some Western politicians have called these leaders strategic and intelligent. Since taking office, they have demonstrated a deep commitment to their countries, who only look out for themselves. Take President Traore as an example. He is disciplined, patriotic, and fully dedicated to Burkina Faso's future. Western media may label him a dictator, but in reality, he is the kind of leader the country needs right now. Unlike many of his counterparts, he has a clear vision, one that aligns with the ideals of Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Thomas Sankara. Sankara was a true African nationalist who wanted to free Burkina Faso from Western dependence with Western powers, but he remained firm in his beliefs. Even French President François Mitterrand once admitted that Sankara was a tough and uncompromising leader. Sankara's defiance of the West was evident in his policies. He openly declared that Burkina Faso would no longer take orders from Washington, Paris, or any other Western capital. He sought to establish relationships with countries worldwide, including those that opposed the West, like the Soviet Union, China, North Korea, and Cuba. Additionally, Sankara supported oppressed people and liberation movements, backing his revolutionary principles with real action. He also pushed for genuine Pan-African unity, insisting that African governments work together in meaningful ways rather than just making empty promises. Most impressively, Sankara led Burkina Faso to achieve food self-sufficiency without relying on Western aid. However, his leadership was cut short when his former ally, Blaise Compaoré, betrayed him and assisted France in orchestrating his assassination. It's easy to see how African politicians collaborate with the West to put their nations in danger. What if Blaise Compaoré had sided with Sankara and refused to give in to the desire for power? Sankara could have lived to witness Burkina Faso truly transform into the nation he envisioned. The saddest part is that after taking power, Blaise not only failed to continue Sankara's vision, but completely reversed it. He became a puppet of France and erased all the progress that had been made. A similar betrayal happened in the Congo. One of the country's politicians, Moise Tshombe, worked with the U.S. to eliminate Patrice Lumumba, brutally torturing him, executing him, and even dissolving his body in acid. Not long after, Mobutu aligned himself with the CIA and, with American backing, seized control of the Congo, ruling for 37 years. His dictatorship went down as one of the worst in the nation's history. This pattern has repeated itself far too many times. The truth is, nothing will change unless Africans take control of their own destiny. Until strong leadership emerges and brings real change, the world will continue to see Africa as weak and dependent. What do you think? Does the West's opinion even matter in this situation? Or are they just feeling threatened by this growing alliance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more content like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.